Welcome to the Ask Me Anything member call with Peter Merholz. I actually just had this delivered, Peter. Perhaps that could be the first question. Can you tell me more about this book I'm about to read?
Sure. So I have a copy too. So Katie, you and I should talk offline. I've been in conversations with Ole and Maeve for like a year and a half, but that's a separate conversation. So in 2015, in 2014, let me think about the timing. In 2015, I had a job that I knew I was about to get laid off from. And separately, I had been doing conference presentations around being a design leader and a design executive and the challenges I was facing, which were largely organizational. And I'd been getting really good feedback about those conference presentations. And with my imminent layoff, I realized I was going to have some time. And so with my co-author, Kristen, we developed a book proposal, shopped it around, and O'Reilly at the time was very into design. O'Reilly was doing a lot of design books at the time, and they were interested in ours. And so we wrote it in about 9 months. It came out, we wrote it in 2015, it came out in 2016. And I look at it and there's still good stuff. People still get value from it, but I cringe a little bit because it's, 6 or 7 years old and my thinking has evolved since then. But it's meant to be a handbook for building in-house design teams. It's still pretty much the only one. There's a book called Liftoff by Russ Unger and Chris Avor that is similar, touches on some similar themes, but none that are quite as brass tacks as that one.
All right, can you just name, and then I'll let others ask away as well, but can you just name one area where your thinking has evolved?
I've thought, well, so that book does not talk much about leadership. It addresses it in light ways, but in the 6 or 7 years since writing that book, I've realized the role that leadership plays in making orgs successful and the shortcoming that I saw in leadership behaviors and how that was getting in the way of doing the right design org work. The other one that's top of mind of late. So in the book, we do talk about how people develop in their careers, but we have a very oversimplified levels framework that I have since expanded and then expanded again into what I call a career architecture. And the work I've been doing for the last 2 or 3 years, I'm often asked by companies to help them think about how to craft career architectures. So that's like, how do people grow in their careers? What are the pathways in front of them? Designers, researchers, content folks. How do they grow as managers? How might they grow as individual contributors? How might they shift tracks? How do we know where they belong? Then how does that inform recruiting and hiring? How does that inform performance management? How does that inform professional development? All that stuff.
Great. All right. Perhaps that raised other questions, or we can take it in totally different directions. Anybody else wants to shoot? You can use the feature from Teams where you can raise your hand, just like Katie just did.
Yes. Okay. So one thing I wanted to know as soon as I was reading this was, as far as things evolving and your thinking evolving, like, do you still, I think one of the things that stuck out to me is like, where should design sit within the enterprise? And I'm dying to know, do you still think that it should live under product? Because this is definitely a contentious topic, I think.
Oh, hey, Donald. Small world. So where should design sit? For me, it's less about where design should sit than design should be no more than 2 levels. The head of design, your chief design officer, whatever you want to call them, should be no more than 2 levels from either the CEO in a small enough kind of organization or the GM, say, of a line of business, right? So you're at Disney. I don't imagine Ole being 2 levels from Bob, but he shouldn't be more than 2 levels from the GM for Disney streaming, right? Now, whether someone like that reports up through product, marketing, engineering, I find less important than that access to the executive suite. I guess the next line of thinking, though, is when we wrote the book, CDOs were not yet ready to be in the C-suite. That's just the chief design officers were not demonstrating, not enough of them were demonstrating executive presence such that they could belong in the C-suite. It wouldn't serve anybody well. That has changed. We're now seeing more and more heads of design who understand business, who know how to engage at that level. And so we're starting to see in some organizations design report directly into a CEO. But yeah, product works fine in most organizations because most of the designers are working on product. But I don't think it's a requirement.
All right, it's good. Thank you. And then let's pass it over to Donald.
Hello. God, good to see you again. Hi, Peter. It's kind of similar, actually, which is a similar question. But where have you seen, I guess, a perfect or close to perfect example of scaling design? And obviously, I agree with your answer, but it really depends on the organization where design sits, their maturity, their size. They might be 200,000 people, they might be 20 people. But give us an example, I guess, over the years of where you've seen where an organization has really nailed it, as in scaling design, embedding customer and user centricity, seat at the table, whatever you want, whatever, obviously this is your area of expertise.
Right.
Is there an example where you filtered out Kool-Aid?
I'm trying to think if I've got a good one. I've seen a lot of good efforts at scaling design, but it still feels like it's early days to declare victory in any way. Kind of off the top of my head, so I co-host a podcast called Finding Our Way with Jesse James Garrett. He was one of my co-founders at Adaptive Path. And yes, Janice, I just don't know how good it is. I haven't talked to the folks there. And we recently interviewed 5 chief design officers. In fact, we've actually interviewed 2 more that are in the pipeline. But I went back and read those 5 interviews, and it was with Katrina Alcorn, who's the GM for design at IBM, Karin Hansen, who runs the largest design team within JP Morgan Chase, Greg Petroff, who was in between jobs but was about to start as the chief design officer at Cisco Secure, Rachel Kobetz, who is the SVP of design at Expedia, and Daniela Georgia, who is the chief design officer at PayPal. And what was really interesting about that, and I reflected on it in this blog post, was in analyzing these interviews, I was trying to find some themes, and what emerged, which is what I titled this blog post, is that design leadership is change management, right? All of these folks, even, Katrina, who was our first conversation, right out of the gate, said this, which surprised me because she has a team herself of 800 designers. There's 3,000 at IBM. It's considered one of the best examples of design at scale. And she still sees herself as needing to make change. Like, they're not done. They're not satisfied. And almost four of those interviews all spoke about design in this change way. The one who didn't, I didn't call it out in the blog post because it felt irrelevant, but it was interesting to read Daniela Georgia's commentary, because as the chief design officer at PayPal, I think she's probably as close to what you're talking about as I've seen, at least from industry, because she's no longer trying to make change. They've kind of arrived. The language she uses and the way she talked was very much, we've set up a lot of great systems and structures, and my job is to keep them going. So we have a customer experience council, and we review all the work that design and product teams are doing, and we provide guidance. We have all these product teams. They're perfectly well staffed. They've reached this point where they don't design, because I asked each of them how design was held accountable. And she's like, there are no metrics for design. That doesn't make any sense. Metrics live at the initiative level. Every initiative has metrics, and we work with them to figure out what those metrics are. But it wouldn't make sense to have design metrics separate from the work that's being done. And that struck me as this sign of maturity, right? If you think about a maturity model, when design is super immature, there are no metrics, but they don't know how they're making an impact. And then as design matures, design needs to demonstrate its value by measuring its impact. But then at some point, that value is just understood by the organization the same way as it is for marketing or engineering or other functions. And you no longer need to measure the impact of this function. You now, at the most mature, you're again no longer measuring the impact of design because it's now understood. You're measuring impact where it matters, at the point of value delivery. And so I thought that was an interesting story. Now, I haven't consulted for PayPal. I can't say I know what it's like inside there, so that's why I can't say they've solved design at scale, but it was really interesting to hear her commentary, and the nature of how she talked about it was different than the other 4 leaders.
That's great. Thanks a million.
All right, very good. Anybody else? I have a couple of questions here, but it is Ask Me Anything, so I'm expecting that there are more questions.
We could talk about layoffs. We could talk about politics. We could talk about movies.
Before this call, Peter showed me his breakfast that he had just finished. If anybody's
you could
curious.
ask me what I ate.
No, so let's just take, I think one
Thomas,
of the most...
hold on. Thomas raised his hands.
All right, you got it, Thomas.
I just sneaked in there.
That's good.
Yeah, thank you.
Peter helps to moderate this.
Have you had, you talked about you're now looking into career paths and designing careers and stuff. Have you have made any experience with matching through data people and careers and future careers?
Not through data. Do you mean what kind of data are you thinking of?
What people now we were experimenting a bit with in a mentoring program right now. So people say who they are and who they are looking for as mentees, and on the other side, possible mentors do the same, and then we match them. Instead of there's somebody brilliant in the HR department who magically puts the right people together, we rely a bit more on data aspects. And we're looking into that. And I was wondering if what were your thoughts or experiences, if that's also an idea to look into when it comes to career paths.
So when I think about career paths, so the short answer is no. The slightly longer answer.
Maybe you got something more.
Well, the slightly longer answer is these career architectures that I help build are founded on a set of skills or capabilities. And there's craft. And so because I work with designers and researchers, et cetera, there's primarily craft skills, right? Interaction design, visual design, user research skills, content skills, sometimes things like accessibility or prototyping skills, right? So you have a set of skills, of craft skills. You also have like professional skills, communication and facilitation and things that you might expect from anybody. So you have these capabilities. Those capabilities then help you shape practices. So experience design is a practice. User research is a practice. Content design is a practice. And those practices are usually defined by 2 or 3 skills that people have that come together. And then you'll have a leveling framework, right? So what does it mean to be an L1, L2, L3? What does it mean when you split management track and individual contributor tracks? But kind of what's expected of you at a particular level. And then you have these roles that are at the intersection of what's your practice, what's your level, what's your track, right? Are you a principal designer? Are you a research manager? Those types of things. And the pathways, so one thing that we do is, like, I try to design it so that people who are early in their career can look forward and get a sense of where they might want to go. And the pathways are meant to be very flexible, such that you can hop tracks, right? You can go from being a designer to a researcher to a content person, because of the way we use skills, right? So practice might have two skills, like experience or product design would have interaction design and UI design as these two core skills. But then there's 4 elective skills. So you have 6 total. And so those elective skills might be research skills. And you might be able to use those electives to actually hop tracks, right? You decide that you're going to stop getting better at design and you're going to dig into research. And so that provides this flexibility that's pretty uncommon in these career architectures, right? Career architectures or career ladders tend to be like, you're a designer, we're only interested in you growing as a designer.
It can only be senior and senior.
Yeah, and so by having this kind of core and elective, it's kind of like in university, right? Where you've got the things that you focus on, but then these other things that you're learning to flesh yourself out. By having a model like that, we allow that type of fluidity. And so the idea is, someone early in their career, maybe at some point they think they want to be a principal designer, a little later, like, actually, I want to be a manager, or maybe I want to be a researcher, and they can chart those paths and then see what's expected of them to get there. Right. And then that becomes their little learning and development program. And so this is a very long answer, right? I could imagine mentors who were well equipped to help someone who's figured out a learning and development program that leads them to that person. And you could probably datafy it, right? You could use technology for folks to say, I'm starting here, I want to go there. The system would have some understanding of, well, these are the skills you'll need to build to get there. Oh, and these are the people who are going to be really good at mentoring in those skills. So I can imagine that. It's all been very manual in my world.
All right, thank you.
Very good. All right, who's next? Anybody else wants to ask Peter anything? Mehdi?
So, good morning, Peter. At least I know you live in California. I'm in Vancouver, BC, Canada. So you're on the same time zone.
That's right. Good morning. It is.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm director of cybersecurity at .cms, and one thing that comes across is innovation, and the fact that how we can utilize innovation in design throughout our organization. We are an organization of 60 people, and so there are lots of challenges because we are quite busy with everything. We wear all different hats every day. Although I'm just supposed to be a security and privacy guy, but I also, deal with customers and so on. So do you think that innovation would help design to elevate such that we can succeed in our careers?
Innovation. There was an article written 2004 or 5 by Michael Beirut, who is a principal at Pentagram, called "Innovation is the New Black." And even in 2005, he was just getting really frustrated with how design kept being talked about as innovation, as if that was the role of design. Because as a design craftsperson, he thinks design has value in and of itself, not simply as a means to do this other thing. So design informs innovation, right? Design is about helping define new, better outcomes, and those by nature will be innovations. Now, I think when you reach a certain level of maturity in design, you're not simply always trying to make the new. It's not about concept cars. It's not about grand gestures of launching new products. It's often just, how do we solve a person's problem in a better way. And sometimes that can be quite boring and quotidian and not shiny or flashy, but it's actually what's valuable. And one of the challenges I actually see savvier design leaders have is trying to convince their executives to not do something bold and glossy, but instead to like, let's fix what's broken. Let's get our current systems working well before we start moving on. Because what ends up happening is you keep launching all this new stuff. The old stuff never gets attended to. Customers are frustrated because they can't actually get anything done. And so there's this tension. So, for design and design leadership, innovation, I'm actually thinking about it in the language of this blog post that I wrote recently on change management. I have got some notes here. This very first idea. So when you're doing change management, the first thing you need to have is a vision of what you're changing toward, right? And that's where innovation can, I think, come into play, right? Is providing a vision for the organization of where they can head. And there's a role that design can play there in particular. And this is something that the chief design officers we interviewed talked about with some frequency. Designing North Stars, right? Where are we headed 3 years from now, 5 years from now? And then using that as a way to align an organization towards a common goal. So there is, I think, a role that innovation can play, and a role that design can play in articulating an innovation that is unlike any other function in the firm. But I also do think that we don't want design to only be seen as a means of innovation, right? I think it will become untethered if it's always looking 3 to 5 years out and not actually solving the real problems that folks are having today. I don't know if that's a satisfying answer.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
All right.
Sorry. I'm
there you go.
I should have raised my hand, but on that note, I guess conversely, what would you say to designers maybe that are in a position where they're viewed more as in that like short-term perspective, as opposed to like, how do they push to become partners and like looking at that longer term vision?
So that's common. And that's where leadership becomes so important. And this is something, so I'll give a little case study on what I'm seeing happening. So I'm supporting JP Morgan Chase, in particular, the consumer bank, which is the largest design team led by Karin Hansen. And when she came in, what she saw was much of her team was doing production work. They were just kind of turning the crank on assets to keep the machine going. And she knew there was a lot more opportunity there. Now, she had been able to help her leadership understand that this team needed to scale. So one of the reasons design teams turn into crank turners is because there's not enough of them. And so when there's not enough of them, you do the thing that you have to do, keep the lights on, keep the engine humming, and that's production. So she's been scaling that organization from about 300, 350 when she started to a year and a half later, about over 800. And she used ratios as a way to help the leadership understand just kind of how understaffed her design team was, right? So designer to engineering ratios. So she's been making change that way. But then what she helped her leadership understand the role that design can play, and she's got buy-in on the 3 in a box, and it's now 4 in a box. So either the triad or the quad. So design, product engineering, and data is the fourth. And she got commitment from her leadership that design should be in every conversation at every level, right? From the most senior executive level all the way down. And so in order to make that happen, she's been building out this leadership layer that didn't exist before. And so she has 100 people that are director level or above in this 800-person organization. And the reason for that is she realized the importance of relationships. So she might have an executive or director level person who doesn't have many direct reports or doesn't have a large team, might have a team of 3 or 4 people, but whose product peer is director or executive level. And she realized she needed folks who could be partners and seen as peers in order for design to be able to be part of that conversation. And so what's been interesting in watching how she's been operating is seeing how she's leaned into relationship management as kind of the key lever for design. So it's not about strategy, it's not about quality yet, though that's part of it. She's doing a whole UX metrics program, et cetera, as well. But she really leaned into this relationship management. And so with this philosophy so Chase is very line of business oriented, right? Banks and checking a card and loans and all of those are businesses. And she wanted to have design leaders in each of those businesses at the highest level, sitting on that GM or CEO's leadership team. And so this is a long way to get there, right? But by having leadership now at these levels, that's what starts bringing up the rest of the organization, so that you'll always be doing production work. There will always be production work for design to do, but for it not to be the only kind of work that design is doing. She's been filling in this leadership layer and helping the organization understand kind of the role that design plays from that highest order strategy all the way through to production, as opposed to simply being given requirements that they're told to execute on.
All right. So the bonus one perhaps here at the end, can you just tell us what do you mean by social contagion?
Not what I mean. So what, for folks who haven't read it, what Yannis is referring to is a post on LinkedIn that I wrote recently, which in turn references a study from Stanford that layoffs are a social contagion. And the point there is most companies doing layoffs don't have a business case for it. It's not about saving money. It's not, there's like, upon reflection, when people like study these companies that do layoffs, they are no better off as a business after the layoffs as they were before the layoffs. So there's no business case for these layoffs. And instead, the reason they're doing these layoffs is because everybody else is doing it. That's the social contagion. Now, what's also worth acknowledging is that scaling was also a social contagion, right? These companies all grew really rapidly because everybody else was growing really rapidly. They weren't thinking about it from a business context. They were looking around and being like, well, they're scaling and they're scaling, we better scale. They weren't looking at their own fundamentals and making a considered business choice there either. And I guess, I'm a socialist that also acts as a management consultant. And what did a friend call himself? A velvet communist? Anyway, the lie that we tell ourselves is that the people who run our businesses actually are making rational, evidence-based decisions, and that's not true. And so that's just, we as designers have to recognize, like, we as designers, especially because we don't know a lot about business, think that other people have figured it out and we're just ignorant. But it turns out that no, they haven't figured it out. And if we try to be good in like learning how business works and studying economics and all that kind of stuff, we're actually not going to understand. We're only going to be more confused when we see what businesses do, because that's not actually how they make decisions. And so we make decisions because we're mammals and primates. We make decisions based on what other people are doing, not on what is rational. So that's what that's about.
Thank you very much, Peter. That was the bonus here at the end. I hope everybody got something out of talking about org design for design orgs, where should design sit, scaling design, matching data and careers, innovation. What do you say to designers? And then here at the end, a little bit of a different view on what's happening in the world today. Thank you so much, Peter.
My pleasure. Take care, everybody. Have a great day.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you,
Thank
Dennis.
you.
You too. Thank you.